So this may turn into a little bit of a PSA, which it should. The reason that I'm not in very good shape going into my first chemo, my first infusion, they call it. They call it an infusion, which I like because it sounds way better than chemo. I'd never heard the term infusion used that way, so it doesn't have the same connotations for me as chemotherapy does. Um, like infusion, it sounds like it could be like a new kind of smoothie or a leave-in conditioner for your hair. You just infuse it with like coconut oil, and that just makes everything better. So, the reason why I'm in such bad shape. Okay, so a little bit of background. My parents' house is in the Ohio River Valley. It's right on the Ohio River. We live directly across the street from a very large bridge into West Virginia. I don't really know bridge sizes. It seems large for a bridge. I guess I just picture a bridge as being like a covered bridge in like New Hampshire. But this is just like, a bridge with like a 2-lane highway on it. Like, we actually have to go into West Virginia to do anything because there's nothing on the Ohio side of the river for 2 hours in either direction. Like, we live in a census designated area with a post office, a church, a dam, and that's it. The other thing you need to know about this area is that it has been completely devastated by the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis, if you're not familiar with it, basically stemmed from when Big Pharma decided that they were going to start selling people Oxycontin. Not even selling it to people, but basically pushing it on doctors to prescribe it and getting people hooked and completely strung out and addicted to opioids. And it was so bad in this area. It's been completely economically destroyed by it. It's absolutely devastating. Like, you can see signs of it everywhere. And so the result of this is that there are sort of like two camps of people in the medical community here. There are doctors who are quacks who will write you a prescription for opioids, like no questions asked. It's like their first response because they get a lot of money to do that. I don't want to speak like too intricately on this topic because I don't know enough about it to start accusing doctors of only prescribing painkillers because they get a kickback. But in my experience, when a doctor has prescribed me for a controlled substance or prescribed me to a controlled substance, ideally they're doing it to help you because they're a doctor, but there's also certain things that some doctors get out of prescribing certain medications that are maybe not quite part of their Hippocratic oath. So you have quacks writing prescriptions for painkillers, and then you have people who won't prescribe painkillers at all. My oncologist is completely against them. The only things I was sent home with after my surgery were Tylenol and acetaminophen, which I was like, you just cut open my body and took out a massive tumor, took out a second tumor on my right ovary, took out my entire reproductive system, glued me shut, and then sent me home with Tylenol. Like, I was not on board for that at all. They gave me Oxy for the first 2 days in the hospital, like once every 4 hours the first day and once every 6 hours the second day. And then they took me off of it, and I was like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm in pain. This is what painkillers are for. Even though when I first found out about the tumor, I went and saw my PCP, who is my parents' PCP. He's a bit of a quack. Not a full quack. I really like him as a doctor for the most part. He sits there and he listens to you and asks questions. The first appointment I went to with him, I think it was like 30, 45 minutes. He just sat there and listened to me, like, talk about everything that was happening to me. Not just physically, but psychologically and emotionally as well. 99% of the doctors that I've encountered are like, get you in, get you out. They don't even want to sit there and like listen to your questions, or they're like listening to your question, but they're like halfway out of their stool, like ready to jump up and leave. And you have to be like, oh wait. Like, I get that you're busy, but I'm a fucking human being. And if you got into this to save people's lives, if you're just leaving me in the dark, it's not really helping me. Like, I guess the fact that you're helping me physically to live is enough that it doesn't fucking matter how I feel or what I'm thinking or what my questions are. But I'm so goddamn sick of doctors that don't have time for you. My oncologist, didn't even talk to me after my surgery. I had no idea what organs had just been removed from my body. It was until hours and hours later that the resident came in and spoke to me, and she's awesome. I really want to elaborate on, that conversation, but I also don't want to digress too much from the original topic at hand. If I was that kid in Catcher in the Rye, they just would have been yelling digression, digression at me. And see, now I want to digress again and explain the part in Catcher in the Rye, if you haven't read it, about digression, but then I'm going to digress. So, what the resident told me after surgery, digression, I might have to revisit those because they're important to me anyway. So I have maybe talked to my oncologist a grand total of like 20 minutes since I got sick. Like, he's just like, this is what's happening to you. Okay, bye. And then he sends his nurse in to answer all of my questions. And maybe that's pretty typical. And I get it. You're fucking busy. You don't have time to like mollycoddle me. But I don't even feel like a human to him. I feel like I'm like, what's a good metaphor for the oncologist? It's like he's like a carpenter, and I'm just like this piece of wood that he like saws at, and then he just like leaves his little workshop. Like, that's about how I feel about him. So I already wasn't on his side to begin with, and when he was like, you can have Tylenol after surgery, I was like, fuck you. And my PCP was like, you can have oxycodone, like you can have Vicodin. So you can see where this is going. It's just, he's that kind of doctor. He's from the old days where you go and like get a prescription for diet pills from your doctor that's really just speed. And that's just how he rolls. And when I had that tumor and he gave me oxy, I was not really too remiss about that because it took a lot off my mind in addition to taking away my pain. The problem was that after only 2 weeks of taking it, I became so constipated that I was hospitalized. And this is when my surgery got moved up, so I guess it ended up working out. I was hospitalized, and they took me off of it immediately, and I went through withdrawal. It was a very mild withdrawal, It was, maybe like, it was overnight. I had a really, really difficult, uncomfortable night because it's like when you come off of painkillers or some sort of opioid, it's like you have been living in slow motion and didn't even realize it. And then all of a sudden, it's like someone hits the fast forward button and it just picks up and picks up really, really, really fast. And all of a sudden, like, you're just like speeding. And so, like, I had like some leg spasms. Like, I kept twitching. Like, I started talking really fast, and like everything was like too much. I was like completely freaking out, and I didn't really know that I was going through withdrawal. I just like felt like I was in like not agonizing pain exactly, but it was so uncomfortable. I was like crying and like shaking the handrails of the bed and like just begging them to give me something. And it wasn't really until the next day that I was like, oh god, it's like, cause like they took me off of that oxy. Yeah, 2 weeks, 5 milligrams a day. That was all it took. That's it. And after my surgery, my doctor, actually, when I was originally prescribed to oxy, the first time I took it, I was like, this is too strong. I hate it. Like, you got to give me something else. And so he wrote me a prescription for Vicodin. I didn't like it either. I don't like the way painkillers feel. Like, I feel like a zombie, and like it's never gonna wear off. And I feel like I would like hallucinate. Like, when I took them, it was really weird. And then I would just like fall asleep sitting upright, which was nice because I could only like be basically in one position because there were tumors on both of my sides, and I'm a side sleeper, but I had to sleep on my back or just sit upright in bed, like on my back, and then my back was hurting because that had the tumor pressing on it as well. It was the only thing that enabled me to sleep. And I hated it until the pain got so bad I went back to it. But when I first took it, I was like, no, absolutely not. So he gave me a prescription for Vicodin. And then when I got out of the hospital and they're like, oh, you can't have anything, like, I talked to my doctor about it, the PCP, because he disagreed. And I had the choice of either going to the pain management clinic at the hospital or having my PCP maintain my, basically monitor my pain medication. Because it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to have pain medication, it was just that it was their policy that they absolutely wouldn't prescribe it. So I went to the PCP, and at first he was like really jittery about it, which also makes me think it's because he's kind of shady. So, or maybe it's just in general, like a lot of doctors are being so closely scrutinized here because of the opioid crisis that he thought because they wouldn't prescribe it meant that he couldn't prescribe it. And it was this whole big miscommunication between the two of them that they just could not even clear up for like weeks or days, I guess. I don't know. The time's kind of gotten away from me because he kept like being worried that he wasn't allowed to prescribe it, and they were like, he's allowed to do whatever he wants, it's just that we won't prescribe it. But like they wouldn't talk to him and he wouldn't talk to them, and I was just caught in the middle. And finally, like, it gets cleared up. Like, I hadn't really taken very many of the painkillers. I would take one and just be like totally fucked up and fall asleep. So, because I had never taken painkillers in my life, so I didn't go through all of them. So after the surgery, I had a bunch of Vicodin left over, and my PCP was like, "Well, do you have any left over from before?" And I was like, "Yeah." He didn't say just take those, but that was the implication, which I was already doing anyway. Which, you know, maybe don't do that. But if you're in agonizing pain and you have a means of taking it away, of course you're gonna do that. Like, of course. That's why it's such a problem in the first place. You don't want to be in pain. You have a solution to all of that. Of course you're gonna take it. So they finally clear all that up. He writes me another prescription for Vicodin. I take the Vicodin, 5 milligrams. I think I was taking it 3 times a day for 3 weeks. And the same thing happened again. By the way, this isn't like normal. Like, when I went to the hospital the second time for fucking constipation, which by the way was more painful than the tumor and my surgery combined. I'm not going to get into the details. I mean, I might digress into them later on, but it's not really something I want to revisit at the moment, possibly ever. Anyway, the doctor was like, it's not really normal for this to happen. I mean, like, millions of people take painkillers and don't have this problem, so you might have some sort of underlying condition that's causing this, like hyperthyroidism, or you need to see like a GI specialist and get a colonoscopy to see if there's something else going on, because it was like Elvis levels of constipation. Like, you're not like you're about to die. He was like, this is the tip of the iceberg, but it's unusual that your entire colon and small bowel are just like, I was really constipated and it was horrible. And so of course, like, to alleviate that, you have to come off of your pain meds. And so I have been thinking, like, oh, Oxy's just really strong. Like, Vicodin's so, like, mild by comparison. Like, it's nothing. No. The withdrawal from Vicodin versus the Oxy, either because I had been taking it for longer or because I was, like, so much more constipated, I guess, was excruciating. Like, I was in the hospital just screaming. Like, I was fucking screaming my head off. And I think that was from the constipation. Um, they gave me like 2 enemas, and it took hours for them to work. And, you know, I had to drink this laxative. Like, he brought in this like gallon of it and put it down, and he's like, just keep drinking it. Try to drink a cup an hour. If you get to a point where you're throwing it up, just stop, because it's not doing you any good anyway. But I typically do not see like, you know, cases this bad, and, you know, I'm just concerned because I'm in a catch-22. Like, if I give you more painkillers, it's not going to come out. At this point, it's just like, it's like concrete. Like, this could take days. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, luckily, like, pretty shortly after he left, the enemas kicked in, so that was super fun. Again, I'm not even gonna get into that right now. But that's what happened to me after taking painkillers for 5 weeks. I didn't like them. They didn't make me feel like high or whatever, or I didn't like the high that they made me feel. I didn't really get euphoric. I didn't really like desire to take them for any other reason than to alleviate my pain. I didn't take more than prescribed. I never abused them. I never cut them up, crushed them up, snorted them, injected them. I just took them the way I was supposed to, you know, responsibly, if there's any responsible way to take painkillers, which I'm now wondering about personally. And I still ended up forming a physical dependency on them to the degree that I went through withdrawal, not just withdrawal, but agonizing withdrawal. And then I had severe side effects that were even more painful than, you know, what I was taking them for in the first place. And the thing is, it just wasn't worth it. And it turns out the other side was right all along. Like, unless you've broken a bone, or my doctor at the other hospital I went to the second time was just like, I recommend them for acute situations, like right after a procedure or when you have serious pain and only for like a few days and then just cutting them off completely. He's like, I'm with your oncologist on this one, because I asked him, like, my PCP is for them, my oncologist is against them, and I don't know what side of the fence to fall on. He was like, I'm on the side of your oncologist. He's like, they can do so much more harm than good. You know, you've been through so much already. Like, why would you want to die from taking painkillers? Like, because they kill people, you know. Either you get addicted in a long-term sense or they cause some other type of complication, and it's just not worth it. And my withdrawal from Vicodin was agonizing. It was excruciating. It was so much longer. It was added to by the complication of the constipation, which, you know, that went on for like a good 24 hours in the hospital. And then when I got home, and here's where I was starting to have a problem, or did have a problem and didn't realize it, because I remembered how bad my withdrawal from Oxy had been in the hospital the first time I went for constipation. Even though I knew I had to stop taking it in order to no longer be in that agonizing pain, I knew that once I did, the pain was going to be even worse, and I couldn't handle it. I couldn't stand it. Like, I actually had like Oxy in my backpack the first time, and I didn't take it even though I knew I could, because I knew I shouldn't. And then like the nurse was like going through my things, just organizing them, and I like actually like had all my stuff out on a table. When she found it, she's like, oh, I gotta turn this into the pharmacy, like we can't have any like drugs from outside the hospital. I was like, that's fine. I was like low-key like played it off like I don't need it, even though in the back of my brain I had been thinking it's right there if you need it. And of course I didn't take it, and you know, like, good for me, like willpower, but look at the alternative. You don't want to be constipated like that. So, but this time it was different. I had smuggled in the Vicodin with the full intent of taking it if things got a little too hairy, and it just got to be too much. And so, even while I was in the hospital, cut off from Vicodin because it was causing me this horrible condition, I think, like, the next day, when I kind of had my wits about me and was, like, starting to, like, come out of, like, the worst of the pain, and this was, like, after the enemas, but before they started working, I took one. And they started working anyway, which, like, thank God for me, or I would have been fucking doomed. And by working, I mean, like, oh my God, you have no idea, like, whoa, like, your small intestine or your large intestine, they're very long, you know. So think about how much can accumulate over a period of time. So I actually took a second one like hours later, like shortly before I left home. I left to go home, and like it was still like everything was that they had done for me was still working. So it was getting everything out of my body. But the fact that I even did that was a problem, you know. And I got home, and exactly 6 hours after the last time I had taken it, I thought I was having a stroke. I thought I was having some sort of neurological incident. I was like completely disoriented. I felt like I didn't know who I was or where I was. I was very dissociative. I would just fixate on one thought like over and over, and I just keep repeating it and like rocking back and forth, and like I go for like little walks with my walker to try and like help loosen up my bowels and stuff. And I was like, I took my walker and I was just running it into a wall over and over. And then I like tried to go get my dad, but then I just like fell over on the floor, and he had to like pick me up and like carry me back in my room. And I was just like, there's something wrong with my brain. I kept saying it over and over. Like, I thought I needed to go to the hospital for like my stroke or whatever. And my dad knew what opioid withdrawal looked like. So he knew exactly what was happening to me. And so I was just like, can people go crazy from being in pain? And he was like, yeah, probably. He's actually just like not laughing at me because that sounds really bad because you just think like, oh, your parents should be freaking out and like taking you to the hospital. But like, he was just like super low key about it. And I was like, is this what withdrawal looks like? And he was like, yeah. And so he like puts me back in bed, and I was still acting crazy. I was like pawing at the air because I couldn't sit still. It was like the fast forward feeling, but times like a million. And I was just like crawling all over the bed like a possessed girl in a horror movie, and like thrashing around and just saying weird shit like, the flower on the curtain is pink, like over and over again. Horror movie. Or like my nurse in the hospital earlier was named Chris, and I kept saying like, Chris takes me for walks in the hallway, because she would like take me out and like help me walk up and down the hallway to help me like stimulate stimulate bowel movement or whatever. It helps you to get up and walk. And if you have abdominal surgery, you have like a ton of gas, and if you don't get up and walk, you're like fucked. It's excruciating. And so I was just sitting there like just crazy, like repeating myself and being weird. And then I'd have these flashes of like being really lucid, and I'd be like, Dad, like what's happening? And he just sat with me with his Kindle and like read and waited for me to. It took 2 hours of this, by the way. This was 2 hours of like pure hell, of like getting in and out of bed, and like I get out of bed and lean my hands against the bed and just like rock in place, and like I was just like crazy. And I asked him like how he knew about it, and at first, he told me about he had gotten open heart surgery a couple years ago, so he, in a lot of ways, he understands a lot of the things I'm going through. And they had prescribed him to Oxy, and he was just like, I don't want it. They're like, well, you kind of have to take it. And he was like, I don't want it. And like, he took it for a few days in the hospital, and they sent him home with like a 30-day prescription. And he said that he had like one left and just never took it. And like, even when he had it, he would only take it when he was in like excruciating pain and just like couldn't move or sleep or do anything and had no choice but to take it. And even then, coming off of it, he noticed a difference. And I was like, was there something that happened before that you knew? And he told me that, and he's told me stories about when he was in Vietnam before. And I know it's really hard for him and to talk about, and some stuff is harder than others. So there are stories that he tells me that are like exciting or funny. There are stories that he's told me that are horrifying or devastating. And this was one that he had never talked about with me. And I'm like lying there like twitching and stuff, and he was like, I knew what it was because I remember what it's like. Because when I was over there, a lot of guys got hooked on heroin. Like, I asked him like what he knew about it from, and he said heroin. And I said, when you were in Vietnam? And he said, yeah. And he's like, a lot of guys got hooked on it. And, I only ever smoked it. I never injected it. Most guys would mainline it, so I was a little bit better off. But so many guys were coming home completely strung out and still addicted to heroin that the government intervened and said, what's going on? We gotta fix this. So they started doing drug tests, like urinalysis, I guess, before they would send people home. And so you would get tested before you were gonna get sent back. And if your test came back dirty, you had to get clean. And he said he tested dirty, and basically they just threw you in a dark room while you went through withdrawal. And he said it took like between 9 and 22 days. And he was surrounded by like 300 other people going through the same thing. And so I was like in bed, like pawing at the air, like talking about fucking curtains and shit. And I knew it wasn't gonna be that long, but I was just imagine doing that for like 3 weeks straight. And even the 2 hours that it was happening, I was like, I can't, man, I'm gonna die. Although the thing that I've realized about pain is that you can take as much as it takes to kill you. And before then, like, you're just gonna be in pain, and it's insane the amount of pain that we can take before we die, because I was nowhere near close, and I was in hell, all from taking prescription opioids. So, yeah, I mean, and that was 3 weeks after surgery. Like, obviously, I'm very susceptible to it and should never take painkillers, but it's not good for anyone. So, if you can get by without it, don't do it. Like, don't even go down that road. This is a slippery slope, and it happens in the blink of an eye, and you don't even know that it's happening. So, yeah, that's my PSA for the day.